Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Rank Squad and welcome to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Looking back at the second legs of the semi-finals of the Champions League, we have our two finalists. Arsenal on Tuesday, making it to their first Champions League final in 20 years and only their second ever in history. And they will be playing against Paris Saint-Germain, who will look to defend their crown in Budapest. We're going to start with today's game, which took place at the Allianz between Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain. And covering that one was Mr. Dean Jones. Here's DJ.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I mean, this was high-quality stuff again between Bayern Munich and PSG. A different game from first time around. But I'll tell you what, it looked like we might have another goal fest on our hands, didn't it? It was 3 minutes, guys. 3 minutes before we saw the first goal of the game. And after the first leg ended 5-4 to PSG, it was always unlikely we would see 9 goals again. But I thought we'd see 3 or 4, if I'm totally honest. And Ousmane Dembele extended PSG's lead in the 3rd minute. It was a brilliant goal. We'll talk about that in a second. Bayern tried their best. They are not going to be happy with the referee. They didn't force their way back onto level terms until Harry Kane scored in injury time. And ultimately, Bayern, the team I thought would probably win this year's Champions League, are out of the competition. And it is indeed now PSG that will face Arsenal in Budapest. And look, no, it wasn't a classic, but it was dramatic. It was dramatic because I think Bayern will feel particularly hard done by. There was a great atmosphere inside the stadium as they attempted to force their way back into this tie. And I really did expect that it would be Bayern who would go on and score the first goal in the game. But no, PSG took their first chance. It was unbelievable play from PSG, where they are on the front foot like this and they are willing to just get at a team, especially on a breakaway. They're unstoppable, and Kvaratskhelia just had one of the games of his life. Like, when he plays like this, he is just absolutely unplayable. A brilliant run, and then he tees up Ousmane Dembele, who does really well to check his run at the far post. It looks like he's going to linger around the far post, then he checks back inside. The defender doesn't really know where he is, and Dembele absolutely thumps one into the roof of the net. And from that moment, like, PSG obviously have like a 2-goal advantage over Bayern, and Bayern start playing like there's 5 minutes of the game left and they've got to score. And they really did for a while just play like pretty frantically in a bid to just get that breakthrough that got them back into the game, and it just didn't happen. I mean, leading into kickoff, obviously there was a lot of talk about the potential weakness for PSG at fullback. Warren Zaïre-Emery playing at right back, filling in for Achraf Hakimi. And look, playing up against somebody like Luis Diaz was never going to be easy. There's always going to be difficulties that come with that. But he found his feet as the game progressed. Second half was good. And I think that maybe that was something that perhaps surprised Bayern. When you looked at the starting lineup, I was like, look, Michael Olise, Jamal Musiala, Luis Diaz backing up and supplying the ammunition for Harry Kane. I was like, I couldn't see any way that Bayern didn't score 2 goals in this tie. And fair play to PSG. I probably don't give them enough credit for their defensive work. I always consider PSG just a side that will outscore the other team if they need to. But to keep that Bayern team at bay until added time, when Kane scores with, it's a brilliantly clinical finish from Harry Kane and something that is expected of him, but nevertheless is brilliant still every single time. But I just don't think that Bayern got as much joy out the fullback areas as they might have hoped. Now, obviously, they'll argue that could have been a lot easier if Nuno Mendes wasn't on the pitch, as they felt might be possible. He'd got an early booking, and then everybody initially thought that he was going to get a red card for handball. Didn't turn out to be the case because Konrad Laimer had handballed it literally 1 second earlier, leading into his handball. And so Mendes got away with it. And they were able to keep Mendes on the pitch. And actually, I felt he also grew into the game. It couldn't have got much worse, to be honest, at that point. But he did grow into the game. And PSG were okay. I say okay, but we all know that there was a big penalty call in this game, and that we all thought, didn't we, that João Neves had committed a handball that would lead to a Bayern penalty. Vitinha rifles a clearance away in his own box, and as Neves lifts his arm up, it smashes against it, and the referee, Pinheiro, waves away protests. The video ref's not getting involved. And I'm honestly, I was losing my mind a little bit. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, this is handball. Like, why are we not seeing this given? And it took a little while before it began to emerge that it's funny how this is being dressed up, a little known rule that none of us knew. Like, it's like a little known rule, but like I literally so far haven't come across a single person that knew this rule, apart from, I think it was Dale Johnson on the BBC who seems to have gone most viral with it. According to the laws of the game, it is not a handball if hit on the hand, arm by the ball which has been played by a teammate, unless the ball goes directly into the opponent's goal or the player scores immediately afterwards, in which case a direct free kick is awarded to the other team. It covers when the ball is unexpectedly hit at you by a teammate, even if your arm is away from your body. The law says you should not give away a penalty. Why? It says when Vitinha blasts the ball clear, could João Neves think the ball was being hit straight at him? Of course, this could be overridden by deliberate handball, but in the context of this situation, a penalty would not be expected to be awarded. I don't know anyone that has watched football for as long as we all have. I don't know that the players knew this rule. I don't know. I don't know why this law exists. Why in that situation is it not classed a handball? We've seen so many bad handball decisions, offside decisions given across the course of this season, and it just looked blatant. And I can understand, like, this rule exists, so that's why the referee hasn't given a penalty. And obviously Bayern are not going to be happy with the officiating from this game. And I don't blame him. Like, Harry Kane was fuming in the late stages of the game. That old thing, PSG playing with 12 men. It did feel like he was on their team at times. And I know that's not literally true, but I can understand from a Bayern perspective why it would have felt like that. Because even as a neutral, I was thinking, why is everything going against Bayern here? But when it comes down to the cold, hard rules of the game, I guess he's got it all right. And it's just that, for me, the rules were wrong in the first place. So that's why Bayern didn't get a pathway back into the game at that stage. Very strange, but I guess that's the way it is and we've got to get used to it. I think people will attempt to go back over the game with a fine-tooth comb and they'll find flaws in what Bayern did. But ultimately, I think that Vincent Kompany picked the team I would have expected. And it's interesting because after the first leg, he was kind of defensive of like the scoreline and saying just because you concede a lot of goals doesn't mean we have to overanalyze every single goal and find the errors and find the blame as to why it happened. Like sometimes, particularly with teams like this, like goals just happen a lot and great goals happen. And I liked that from him. Vincent Kompany's a defender by trade. Like he loves the defensive side of the game. But I think maybe it's a case of the what ifs for Bayern. What if Jamal Musiala had been at his best? He wasn't. What if Lennart Karl had been fit enough to play a bigger part in this game? A player that's emerged and been great in big moments at times for Bayern and been able to just, unlock the door, pick the lock. He only managed to come on for 5 minutes at the end. You get Nicholas Jackson come on for Musiala with 11 minutes left. Alphonso Davies came on with 20 odd minutes left, and I thought he did pretty well, to be honest. But still, they struggled and they haven't managed to make it through to the Champions League final. But PSG are now looking to successfully defend their crown. They are an outstanding team. They are the best team in the world, I think, when you now assess it, given the form, the consistency, the results in big matches. It's going to be an intriguing final. And in Arsenal's favour, I would say that they've been very consistent and they have been very good at locking the back door so they don't concede goals. But PSG they just look flawless at times. And when Kvaratskhelia plays like this, it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. Like, he was phenomenal in this game. And obviously we probably take for granted just how good the attacking talent was that was on display across these two legs. But Kvaratskhelia just stood out a mile at times for how easy he found it, how quick his feet were, how hard he was to track. Obviously ended up with an air shot, but he looked like he would score himself in this second leg. Didn't quite manage to do it. But equally, PSG, they do defend as a team, and they work really hard off the ball to make sure that they get players back, and they know that they can break and that they'll hurt you. So they've got to make sure equally that they have the players in the positions to just make themselves hard to break down. And the way that they rotate positions with, between like Vitinha and João Neves and Fabian Ruiz, and they'll block you off, and then once they get the ball, they'll just pass it around you and you'll be spinning around in circles. And obviously then once they break away and you've got Kvara and you've got Ousmane Dembele or Barkler or Doué, these guys are just absolutely different class. And here's the big thing that I think is going to be in PSG's favour now going into a final. It's that they're not just a team that goes out and outscores you by going and scoring 5 goals if you're going to score 4. Right? Not that I think Arsenal are going to score 4 goals in the final, but they've showed that they can get through ties differently and they can play in different ways depending on what they are up against. And when they don't have the ball against Arsenal, when they do have the ball against Arsenal, they have shown us against this Bayern Munich side that they are more than capable of matching anyone, beating anyone. So this is not just about a spectacle. This is not just about PSG going on a goal blitz in the final and trying to mesmerise us with the fast, dynamic attacking play that they're capable of. It's also about that midfield battle for me. Like, it's going to be really intriguing. Obviously, being English and having bigged up Declan Rice for so much of this season, like, I'm going to be very, very enthralled by how he manages to try to get a grip on a midfield battle like the one that he's going to face against PSG, especially going into a World Cup. But for PSG, history is on the line now because they can go and complete this journey and make it a second successive Champions League success, which is absolutely remarkable to consider. Arsenal obviously have history of their own to make. They haven't won the Champions League before. But, I think it's been impressive that Arsenal have overcome the stigmas that have been attached to them in terms of bottling it and all of that. But they haven't flourished in these late stages. They haven't yet flourished. We haven't seen amazing performances from them. I thought they were really good, and Jack's going to talk about it in a second, but I thought they were really good in the semi-final second leg. But what I think about PSG is that as an all-rounded team, they are capable of different game plans, and that would be my concern as an Arsenal fan going into this Champions League final. Like, I'm super excited. Like, I've been convinced all the way along that it was going to be an Arsenal-Bayern Munich final, but I'm absolutely fine with this one. I think that Vincent Kompany will be heartbroken. I think that he'll be frustrated and he'll be complaining and he'll be wondering how this didn't go his way, because there was really not a lot there that separated these sides in the end. But there can't be anybody out there that doesn't think that PSG don't deserve to be on this stage again for the second year in a row. And if I'm honest, it might be that we get a better final now, because PSG won't play within themselves. They won't play cagey football. They'll be willing to soak up pressure, but as we've seen, like, they'll hit you on the break, but they'll also play their rotations across the midfield, and they just make you think constantly, and you can never rest against this PSG team. And it's the ultimate test. If Arsenal are going to go now and put this run to an end, it's 20 years, obviously, since they've got to a Champions League final. I was there 20 years ago in their last Champions League final, and, luck wasn't on their side that day, and they were really up against it in that final. They'll be up against it again here. They'll hope that at the very least they can keep 11 men on the pitch for this one. But I'll leave it to Jack now to run us through exactly what he thought of that Arsenal semi-final, and to just refresh our minds over how they have made it to Budapest to set up a Champions League final against Paris Saint-Germain.
Yes, welcome back to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Thank you very much to Dean for covering that crackerjack of a game between Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain. But I'm going to take you on to Tuesday's action, where Arsenal booked only the second Champions League final date in their history, 20 years after the first in 2006. And what I thought was very special about this, before we get into the game itself, was obviously in 2006, Arsenal hadn't moved to the Emirates yet. So this is the first kind of in the Emirates era. But also in that 2006 game, they booked their spot in the final away at Villarreal. And there's been a lot made of the Emirates atmosphere this year, the anxiety that's been part of the league campaign, the kind of fear, the idea that Arsenal have maybe endured rather than enjoyed a lot of this season. I thought the atmosphere at the Emirates, as it should be, right, for a Champions League semi-final, was incredible. For pretty much the entire 90 minutes of this, it felt so loud. And from the moment you saw the kind of buses arriving, there was a challenge, right, to Arsenal fans laid down, a gauntlet, if you will, from last week in the Metropolitano. And we spoke a bit about the fact that, certain decisions didn't go their way, and that coming partly from home advantage, right, having the crowd on your side, having the crowd at the referee's back, baying for blood in many ways. And I thought that Arsenal had the same in reverse here, and that was always going to be the question. I thought that they rose to the occasion magnificently. And maybe there's an element of kind of freedom that's happened because of what went down with Manchester City on Monday, the sweeping win over Fulham at the weekend, which felt like the first game that Arsenal fans have been able to kind of enjoy in its entirety for quite some time. But I thought that throughout this one, the atmosphere was different to what it's been in recent weeks. And not just in the Premier League. I think in other competitions as well. When opportunities were missed, when a pass went astray, there wasn't any of the groans and feelings of kind of anxiety, I think, that have permeated the Emirates in recent months. Notably, it's totally fine to be worried or be anxious about the fact that you're on the verge of, on the cusp of history. And, you've got a mad City side breathing down your necks. Every game is a kind of war of attrition in some ways. But I thought it was different here. It felt like this was a crowd 100% at their team's back. And you heard it numerous times, whether it was the chants, whether it was just the kind of roars that greeted moments throughout the game at both ends of the pitch. I thought that the crowd were phenomenal. So I credit where it's due, first and foremost, to the Arsenal crowd. And to have that night where you qualify for a Champions League final on home turf for the first time in your history is incredible. And seeing the kind of celebrations afterwards, and I saw certain people saying, are they over celebrating, which seems to be something that only ever seems to be levelled at Arsenal, if I'm honest. felt weird to me. For that crowd to be able to experience that, not all of them will be able to go to Budapest. This will be the moment of the season for so many of these fans. And, I think that stands even if they do go and win the Premier League. Being able to be there, I was there that night. We saw what the Emirates could be. The atmosphere was incredibly special. This was a moment, and I think the fans are so entitled to be able to celebrate that and celebrate, what an achievement is to get to a Champions League final. We've seen it's taken a long time to bring Arsenal back to this level. And, last year it was semi-finals. The year before that was the quarters. They've worked their way through this, the consistency of output, but also the learnings on the job to get things done. The atmosphere feels so different, I think, at Arsenal than it did even 2 weeks ago. You look at the City result and you're thinking, that feels like a long time in the rearview mirrors. And football changes fast, right? Football moves at a quick pace. But suddenly, from a period where it felt like Arsenal were trying to navigate a storm, it looks like the skies have cleared and it's kind of wind in the sails and off Arsenal are going towards a potentially historical season. And I thought they played like that a little bit yesterday as well. This wasn't a game where everything was fluid. It was never going to be for either team. But I thought that Arsenal controlled most of this game really, really beautifully. And in the first half, they were very much the better side. Although I thought, 5 minutes before half time, you're kind of waiting for anything to kind of break open and kind of assuming that whilst Arsenal have been the better team here, Atleti will be pretty pleased with this if it goes in at 0-0. And obviously things change with the goal. 43 minutes on the clock. Victor Gyökeres gets in behind. Jan Oblak comes out and then retreats because he realizes he's not going to get there. Gyökeres stands up the cross for Trossard, who I thought took too long, right? Like I thought he should have got the shot away earlier. I was wrong, 100%. He shifts it out of his feet beautifully. And actually a little bit of calmness in the final third is perhaps what Arsenal have been missing in recent weeks. And look, Trossard divides opinion, I think, amongst the Arsenal fan base and amongst the worldwide football fan base, in that sometimes he can be a little bit ponderous and a little bit slow. But actually he sorts his feet out beautifully here. He has the patience to wait for the opening. He fires a shot in, which Oblak, I think, does really well to get down and save, considering he must see that so late. But there's Bukayo Saka, the Arsenal boy, the star boy, to drop in and tuck that ball away. And it was weird because the commentary wasn't all that excited. And I think that as most people potentially watching it did, they were like, well, Saka must be offside. He's nowhere near offside. And I think it's interesting that you're kind of looking at it and thinking, wow, he's timed that run to perfection. Lenormand loses his man in the kind of chaos and the melee of the box, and Arsenal are 1-0 ahead. And when that happens, not only does the old adage of 1-0 to the Arsenal ring around the Emirates, but also you get this kind of feeling that, okay, you're going to have to come and break Arsenal down now. And I suppose a little bit like the first leg, Atleti come out in the second half much more aggressive with much more intent. And for the first 20 minutes or so of the second half, they do kind of make the running, if you will. They do sort of create the more chances. But it felt like Arsenal were more comfortable than they were at the Metropolitano. Now, maybe that is home advantage coming into play, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But I do think that you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of this is a team that knew what they had to do yesterday. And we'll come on to individuals and the way that the game played out a little bit later. But more than anything, I thought it was an Arsenal side who had the wherewithal to understand the situation and play the game in front of them rather than thinking, a game in the future. And maybe there's a clarity of vision that's come about in recent weeks just because it's like, right, one game after another, we need to just win them all. And hopefully if we do that, we will end up with 2 trophies at the end of the season. And maybe that's kind of clarified it for everyone. Maybe it's just the return of Bukayo Saka. Maybe it's the influence of Miles Lewis-Skelly in the centre of the park, who had another phenomenal game after running the show against Fulham at the weekend. But there is a period here where Atleti kind of get the running, and a couple of penalty shouts that don't go their way. Now, the first one where Gio Simeone goes round the goalkeeper and kind of gets eased off the ball by Gabriel, I think is fair enough. I don't think that's necessarily a penalty. I know that there is a lot of claims from it from an Atleti perspective. I think that one's fine. That's sort of grappling and trying to get back there. I think it's mostly good defending from Gabriel. The one that I think Arsenal are incredibly lucky on is the next one, the Calafiori challenge on Griezmann. Now, the referee has blown up for a foul from Marc Pubby on Gabriel. I don't think if there's any contact, it's instigated by Gabriel. It's not Pubby on him. And therefore, when it's checked, because Calafiori's foul on Griezmann is 100% a foul. Like, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. And I think that the contact in the first instance is instigated by Gabriel rather than Pubi, and therefore probably isn't a foul, and Atleti should probably have a penalty. Now, Arsenal fans listening to this, I'm sure are like, well, think about what happened in the reverse fixture. And I think, fair enough, right? You can look at those things and say, okay, they leveled themselves out over a tie. However you kind of want to play that is fine. But last week, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the referee overturned the penalty on Eza, and that was home advantage at play. And that was the dark arts at play from Simeone and co in terms of kind of forcing the referee's hand. And I think at the time, if you listen back to last week's podcast, I said, that's fine, right? That is what home advantage is supposed to give you. You get more decisions at home, etc. I think if this is at the Metropolitano, Atleti get a penalty. And so when you kind of look at it from the reverse angle, yeah, okay, things go your way or don't go your way in certain situations, you tend to get more at home. I think Arsenal get away with one here in that I think this probably should be a penalty. But if that levels things out, over the course of a tie, then, fair enough, as far as I'm concerned. I also think Atleti get away with one late on in that Pubi pulls back Gyökeres, and I think he is very much last man and probably should be sent off for it, although the game is kind of done at that point. I think if it's 1-1, he gets sent off. And I think that's quite an interesting kind of dilemma in the mind of the referee, because he definitely pulls him down. And I don't think anyone is getting to him without Pubi's hands around Gyökeres to kind of slow his run down. And that brings us on, I suppose, to Victor Gyökeres, who had a phenomenal game and is having a phenomenal end to the season. There's been a lot of discussion around him in this campaign. And at the start of the year, at the start of the season, we spoke about Victor Gyökeres in the shape of he doesn't necessarily need to be the guy that wins Arsenal the games against Man City, the guy that wins the games in the latter stage of the Champions League. What Victor Gyökeres is brought in to do is to effectively win the games that Arsenal drew last season, your Fulhams, your West Hams. And at the moment, he's going about that business brilliantly. But I think this might have been his best performance in an Arsenal shirt. Now, some people will point to the weekend. That's also fine. But that was against a defective Fulham team, who I have the displeasure of watching most weeks at Craven Cottage. This against an Atleti backline who, sure, are not what they were, are not Godin and Jimenez. They are a different shape and a different kind of side in terms of how they defend. But he gave them fits all night long. Now, Arsenal have started to go a little bit longer. They've started to utilise his channel running a little bit better in recent weeks. And I think that's a part of why we've seen more from Gyökeres. But this was also a complete striker's performance in so many different ways. He hassled, he harried, he forced the ball. At one point when Declan Rice goes steaming up the pitch to try and create a break, it's Victor Gyökeres who drops back into midfield to cover the bases. And we praised Haaland for doing this against Everton on Monday night. Could do exactly the same here for Gyökeres, having the kind of nous and the sense that you're one goal to the good in a Champions League semi-final with less than 30 minutes to play. Someone has to plug the gap. I thought he did that really, really beautifully. It was one moment in a sea of them, but I thought he gave nightmares to the Atleti defenders in getting in behind, in having to track those cover runs, in his pressing game, and his physicality looks so much sharper than it did at the start of the season. We knew that Gyökeres was a player who, okay, maybe his acceleration isn't unbelievable, but his top speed is good, and he obviously can kind of bounce in behind and get the better of defenders in terms of strength as well as his speed. But I think that he looks leaner, he looks sharper, he looks fitter. And the way that he is going about his business in a period where Arsenal lost Kai Havertz and people were wondering, was that going to be the kind of killer factor in not getting over the line? Because we know that Kai Havertz has done this in big games over and over again throughout his career. Gyökeres has been, accused of being wasteful. And look, he should score here, right, in this game. There's a beautiful cross that comes in that he manages to guide over the bar when it very much should be hitting the back of the net and finishing this game off for good. But I think in terms of his all-round game and in the all-round performance, this was one that he can look back at and be like, yeah, I have had a major, major contribution in getting us to a Champions League final. And then the question comes as to where Arsenal can go with this, right? Like what Arsenal can do, because they come into a Champions League final here as underdogs, as they did in 2006, I think, although maybe to a slightly lesser extent. They come in with a side who are very, very good at defending, and they showed that again here with a clean sheet. I think that's their 10th clean sheet in the Champions League this season, which is a remarkable record in itself. There was a stat yesterday on the Amazon Prime coverage, which showed that the team who has won the Champions League in the last 20-odd seasons has either had the most or the second most clean sheets in the competition throughout. And Arsenal currently lead the way in that regard. Clarence Seedorf has been speaking about the kind of art of defending and how that was somehow a little bit lost in the Bayern PSG game. And that if Arsenal come out here and they close down those spaces and they go one-on-one and they go man-to-man and they don't lose their markers, but they have those covering actors and covering defenders, then maybe there's an opportunity to frustrate. And we know that they have the capacity to make things happen. And especially, I suppose, with Bukayo Saka back to form. And he obviously is the goal scorer last night, which is beautiful in that he is the academy boy. He is the player. I think you see more 7 shirts at the Emirates than any other number. And that's because Bukayo Saka has become a symbol of this football club. Him coming back to fitness, and it looks like full fitness. And I know they're managing his minutes, but the fluidity with which he's playing, the freedom with which he's playing, the taking on players, the drifting inside, the jinking runs, all of what was kind of brilliant about Bukayo Saka looks like it's back in full flow. And I think throughout this season, as he's made these kind of stuttered recoveries from injury, he's looked hampered through a lot of it. He's looked like he's not confident with his own ability to keep that fitness, to keep that faith. And yes, Arteta is being careful with him, and as he should, considering how important he has become in this run-in very quickly. Arsenal have put together, their best attacking performance in months at the weekend against Fulham, and then a performance to knock out a very, very stubborn Atleti side with an incredible intensity about them in a Champions League semi-final. That is no easy task in any lifetime. And he has been at the heart of both. Yes, he scores the goal here, but also his creativity on that right flank, allowing Arsenal to find the outball, to take on his defender, to win free kicks in dangerous areas. All of these are part of Bukayo Saka's game that are intrinsic to the way that Arsenal play. And I think that when you put it all together, that relationship he's building with Victor Gyökeres as well seems to be on a wavelength. They're finding each other in impressive situations and finding each other with a kind of real ease and telepathy that I didn't think was going to be there so quickly after his return. We've talked about Arsenal's right-hand side being a key of combinations down the years. We talked about that kind of axis of Ben White and Martin Ødegaard and Bukayo Saka being a key part of how Arsenal attacked for so many years. And then kind of coming back to it now and being like, where are you building these different relationships? Where are they coming from? Well, this one looks like it's in a really, really good space. And talking of Ben White, I think he deserves some props here because actually a couple of weeks back, he looked like the weak link in this team. We saw in the Southampton game, they ran at him, they attacked that side. It looked like Ben White felt like the weak link in this defensive unit. And yesterday, I thought he stood up very, very tall. He did some excellent defending one-on-one against Ademola Lookman in the first half. And then, as he kind of grew into the game, the confidence grew within him. And suddenly you're watching a Ben White that looks far more akin to the player we knew a few seasons ago. And look, there's some shouts on social media, mostly from Arsenal fans, that he should probably be on the plane to the World Cup, etc., etc. And if Thomas Tuchel was watching last night, he's going to be thinking about Ben White. Maybe. I think that, one swallow does not a summer make. But this was a really impressive performance in the heat of the moment, under the spotlight. And after a kind of month of criticism for Ben White, this was his best game in a long time. I thought he really stood up to the challenge, and it's good to see a player like him, who's obviously had his own injury history, coming back there and being like, yeah, okay, I can still handle this at the top level. I thought he did a remarkable job, and credit where it's due, because the criticism was loud and the credit should be loud as well at the same time. And so Arsenal march on to the Champions League final, where they will meet Paris Saint-Germain, reigning champions. And we're in for an absolute crackerjack of a game in Budapest on May the 30th. They say that, to use a boxing analogy, styles make fights. Right, and this is going to be two very different styles of football coming up against each other. We know that Arsenal have had success against them already this season, but it felt like a very different proposition to what they feel like now, as far as I'm concerned at the very least. But I think that this is going to be an absolutely intriguing final, and I absolutely cannot wait to see it in action. And with that, we're going to pull this Champions League takeaway to a close. Thank you so much to Mr. Dean Jones for his analysis on that PSG Bayern game. I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.